sitting in a board, it's like, oh, the RIOC board, these, and then have a powerful body, but it's like, unless some issue actually is presented to the board for a vote, we really can't influence. We can suggest stuff to the company, to the corporation as a whole, but something has to appear before the board as an issue. We have to vote on it for us to really enact something.
Well, the three of us can ask to have something put on the agenda.
Yeah, but as people say, oh, well, you know, some relatively minor issue is happening. They're having some issue on the island with, you know, public safety or with some other organization on the island. We can't go in and just tell that employee to do something. We can have a discussion with the president, we can discussion with the operations head and say, you might want to look into this, but as authority, we can only have something presented to the board. It can be, we vote on it, and that's the power that we have to do something. So we can't go and say, you go do that.
Not sure I totally agree with that.
But
the problem then becomes the management style. I mean, you've got then everybody listening to, you know, I may tell them to do one thing, and Faye will tell them to do something else, and Michael will tell them to do something else. So it's not a very smart management style. But if you see something, I think it's up to us to talk to Leslie, or talk to Steve, or talk to Fernando, and say, hey, this is wrong.
yeah, we can suggest.
Well, we can do more than suggest if we all agree on it. Then we
Yeah.
have to get it put on the agenda, but we don't go in order as individuals because, again, it could be conflicting. We should, I think Grace had a question.
Are the meetings set up at a certain time, like the first Monday of every month, the first Wednesday of every month, or they just set up when everybody agrees it should be?
The committee meetings or the board meetings?
Board meetings.
The board meetings are published schedule. They recently changed. They used to alternate mornings and evenings, and we had a community meeting, and they said no, they'd rather have the evenings, so we did them all evening.
But they set it at the first meeting of the year, for the whole year.
Oh, for the whole year.
Essentially, they're Wednesday evenings at 5:30 at Manhattan Park Theater was the recent district.
And the committee meetings are according to when it's convenient for the members.
Right. Now, the one thing that's recently changed is in my first time around, the operations group was telling us that the board members had to be present for a committee meeting, and that was a huge challenge for me personally because of the amount of travel. This time around, they now have entered the 21st century and allowing us to actually use teleconferencing and dial in and things like that. We still a struggle with logistics trying to get the timing.
In fact, the committee meetings are videotaped, and you can download them and watch the committee
Well,
meetings.
no, they're mainly just recorded. Yeah.
Audio.
But the board is...
The board is videotaped.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't leave the video recordings of the board up on the website. It's not archived up there. It's just the latest one. I've checked a couple of times recently. The minutes are all archived on.
You can call Mike and put one up.
No.
Yep,
Just,
Sure, but
yeah,
someone said there's an issue with space on the provider, but we have to check. Because a couple, you know, the board meetings you can run 2 or 3 hours, and 2 or 3 hours of video is, you know, a lot of space.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the prep work you need to do for board meetings?
Well, hopefully you get the information 10 days before. You don't always. Sometimes you say, you'll get a section that says documentation to follow. But generally, you'll get a disc. And the disc will have the agenda, and behind the agenda will be whatever it happens to be, a resolution about such and such, and behind that will be any pertinent information about here's why we're doing this, and here's who approved, and here's what's good, here's what's bad. And we just kind of go through all of that before we show up.
That also has gotten a lot better.
It has gotten
in
better.
terms of the current staff is much better at providing information. In the past, we had struggles where you'd get a board package to study, it was all printed out, and you'd go through it and spend a couple of days reading through everything and doing whatever research on the issue you want to do. And then you'd arrive at the board meeting and they'd say, oh no, we're changing all this. And then they'd give you a whole new stuff right as you walk in the door. And so you see us flipping through this stuff, and they just change a whole bunch of things right when you walk in the door, and you're still going to vote unless you get enough people to say we're at the table.
But I think now we're making an attempt to have enough lead time on issues that they come up in committee, come from the relevant committee ones beforehand. And committee meetings there's a 72-hour notice requirement, and those are generally, unless we have special topics, open meetings, so they're open to the public.
I don't want to act too naive, but When do you have an opportunity, let's say that it's a committee discussing the tram, for an example. When do you have an opportunity to sit down and to hash out things and to discuss things and try to work out something that you could come across, get a consensus without it being before the community? You never have an opportunity to do that?
Well, that's what we're saying that makes it difficult, is that.
I don't know how you run it.
We would have to be with different little groups, because.
Just in smaller
Well,
groups?
but our tram issue, for instance, would come up at the operations committee meeting, and that's why we will try to go to those meetings, so that we can hash them out there.
But you're hashing out, you can't do it in a meeting.
Yeah.
That's why some of the meetings go
That's
through.
why
They
the
all
hours.
have to be, open meetings,
Yeah.
which is fine. You don't have a chance.
Now, there were some, for example,
Just
with
how do you work out anything?
well, no, with the tram, see,
Consensus.
the tram was a very special case. 'Cause
That was just a throw out, I don't even
Well,
mean that.
I know, but the difference though is that the tram was an enormously complicated project. For future board members, there's gonna be issues with the motor gate and the spiral, which are gonna be expensive, complicated projects. There's gonna be the potential issues with the construction of the high-tech center, if that comes about, which is gonna be an enormous challenge. Even though that's being handled by the city, all the work that's gonna be involved in extending our infrastructure down there, the wear and tear that their construction operations are gonna put on our roads and our bridges and our bridge, are gonna be issues that the board's gonna have to address. And how we work with this city to get, in some parts, get money for infrastructure expansion for our water and sewage and power and the AVAC, and what are we going to provide and what are we not going to provide? How are they going to deal with the demolition materials, so it doesn't disrupt the islands? How are they going to get the building materials on? What impact is the traffic and other facilities that are going to cause? What can we get from the groups to benefit the island for infrastructure operations as we deal with what could be built there? These are all kinds of issues that the board has to look at and decide and help to guide.
Yeah, you mentioned that you as a board cannot arbitrarily dictate things to happen on the island. You can only deal with things that are presented to you. Who decides what is presented to you?
That's a very political question. In most cases, it's the committees, but some things don't even make it to the committees.
So,
Well, yeah, if there's an operations committee meeting or an audit committee meeting or whatever, the committee chair will say, we're going to bring this up to the full board, and that will go to the full board. If the commissioner wants to put something on, or if somebody in the staff, Fernando or Leslie or somebody wants us to address something, they'll put it on. And if three of us want to put something on as an agenda item, we can do that.
So that, in other words, you in effect do decide what you deal with in cooperation with each other, or
The committee chairs decide at the committee meetings, or then if three of us get together and we want to discuss something that hasn't been talked about in the committee meeting, can be put on.
or staff will bring items forward for consideration, hopefully first to committee, but sometimes just directly to the
I
board.
think Michael's point, though, was at the time something happens, if we see something, we don't go over to, I don't know, the guys on the grounds and say, hey, stop, mowing that lawn because I don't want you to. So
Yeah.
we try to work through the staff whenever we can. I
but
think
you
that
can
was
bring
the point.
subjects to bear that you feel are important.
Yes.
Yeah.
to the island plan.
Grace, your question before, I'm not sure I understood it. Were you
Well, I
saying?
was wondering if everything had to be done in an open committee,
Yes.
then basically how do things get done? I mean, there has to be certain things where people, the tram was a bad idea because it's so technical, but if it could be something that's not technical, where people have different ideas, maybe you could work it out beforehand to get some kind of consensus like they do in the real world.
Well,
And that's what we
So
call
the committee meetings, but it's in public.
But it's in public, but it's.
Yeah.
It also reminds me that the corporation does operate, the president and the very staff, executive staff, they have a substantial amount of leeway in what they do. It's, for example, there's only certain things like the disposition of state assets. If you lease something, if you sell something, that has to require board approval. If you want to do something that's $50,000 more, it requires board approval. If they're doing something that's $49,000, they can do assuming that it's within the guidelines of the budget that we've approved. What do you see?
I've never, I've never been to a committee meeting before we are. Can the public speak?
Yeah, I was just saying.
The public isn't really supposed to speak, but we always let them.
But the committee meetings that are open for people who are not RIOC members to attend.
That's what I was going to say.
They're all the committee.
Ordinarily, all committee meetings are open to all residents, all interested parties.
We have some people who are regularly there, some people.
It's usually a representative of Bureau.
How do we find out when the committee meetings are good?
They're up on the website.
On the website from the Wire, and they're hung up
Mhm.
outside. Rare
Blog.
They're on the Wire.
No, they're on the wire, but they-
Yeah.
Send them to
Two
the notice.
more.
And they're always on the blog.
Question. Is it appropriate to go into executive session to hash something like that
No.
out?
Appropriate doesn't even matter, we're allowed to.
Yeah.
The open meetings law.
There are only
says you
certain,
can't.
there are only
You can
certain
only go
things
into
that we're
certain
allowed to
things Mike
discuss in
mentioned.
executive session. And no business, they say we're gonna go into executive section, we're not conducting any business. It's only like if we have personal issues, which because of privacy laws, we're not allowed to discuss in public. Or if we're going over certain contractual issues where the details haven't been made public to the vendors yet, and we can't discuss it. And then, but we don't take any votes in there.
Real estate issues.
Yeah, same, right, those are contractual issues that haven't been decided yet. During the tram, we had a number of calls with the engineering vendors about the specifics of stuff that most people wouldn't care about, you know, cable types and tensioning systems, stuff like that, where they were answering specific questions. There weren't any really people on there beside a handful of RIOC folks, staff, and the vendor itself, where I had presented specific questions to them about the engineering details of the tram.
Where's the blog where this information is available? Could I have that?
Well, that's one place. You're talking about the meetings?
Yes.
Scheduling? The meetings are scheduled and you can go over to the RIOC office and they're
And also
posted
on
on
the
the
website.
They're in the Wire, the Main Street Wire, and on this
Not on the
one.
Wire.
The RIOC
Are they not in the Wire?
Yeah.
Or the committee meetings on?
They're on the RIOC
Oh.
website? Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
the RIOC website.
We have been able to, there's some issues that are bothering us. Let's say, well, as long as there's 4 people, there's some issues that we would like to speak to each other about or hash it out. You can do that, as long as you don't have fun.
So do you ever, do you
Well,
ever,
some privacy, but if they're very little
Sorry.
time, you could talk to each other on the phone, you know, if there are 3 people and, you know,
Two
who
in the
discuss something
As long
and
as
you
you
want to talk to,
Two others or whatever, yeah, we just can't all get together in one room at a time and bang.
But
it
as a
together.
can you do a
committee
conference
meeting,
call
if there
with
are
Lori and-
That's
less
what
than
was
5, that doesn't
Even if there's
matter.
more than 5 in a committee meeting, it's okay, because it's been publicized and everybody knows it, and the public can be there.
Have you ever tried to chase the rooms and yelling at each other?
How about calling everything a social event?
You mean lampshades?
I say we just keep passing out the liquor.
That's it? It'll lubricate the discussion then?
Great.
What's the RIOC website, what are the call letters?
RIOC.com.
Just
www.com.
Linda?
Yeah, when I vote for state and federal officials, I think about how they have, you know, voted in the past, and whether I want to reelect them. Can I suggest that you have a record of how you vote on issues for this board, so the public will know how you vote?
In the minutes of all board meetings,
Where do you see the minutes?
on the RIOC website?
On the website.
Okay, so I would like to suggest someone do a tally. I don't know if you could ask someone in the mayor staff to do a tally of issue 1, 2, 3, and however we vote. Not just have to go, no resident is going to go through every single board meeting and look at every single
Maybe
vote.
a newspaper editor will, or somebody on his staff.
Can someone react to that?
I'm not sure that's Rio's job. I mean, it's there for us to do, the analysis is up for anybody who
A
cares.
good
So
thing to
how far back
remember.
does it go?
19, whatever.
The votes?
Yeah, everything, all the minutes, they go way back.
so they're public record.
They're public record.
Keep in mind that this business of putting on an election to suggest nominees to a government to appoint is not a RIOC function. It's a RIRA function. Because
Yeah,
RIOC
we're
So
such
can
an
someone
analysis.
here do it?
Right.
That's what you just did to yourself.
Yeah, sure, because we have nothing else to
Good
do.
idea, you do it.
Yes. What has been your experience with ex officio members of the boards and in general political appointees on the board? Has that proven to be a challenge in any way, given that you are, quote, island?
You kind of always know how the vote's gonna go.
Pardon?
You know how the vote's gonna go when the meeting comes.
Can you talk, that's an interesting segue into, can you talk about the relationship between the board and RIOC itself? Jensen?
It's about
Well, I'm saying,
Margie
if
appreciated
something has
that
been put
drink.
on the agenda by the commissioner and by the staff, you pretty much know that the ex officio member is gonna vote for it.
The ex officio members are the Commissioner of Housing and the Director of Budget. And usually he says, his associate.
Right, I've never met the guy.
He was there once, actually.
Must have been recent.
They have the people who vote with all the other members of the, and they're not appointed, or?
They are on the table.
They're
And
appointed
only-
by virtue of their position.
Of their position.
Okay.
And the only other appointed person, and I think that was your question, your other appointed, we're all appointed technically, but I believe you mean anybody who hasn't been elected, but the only other one is the newest board member, Sal Ferrer, and we've only had
Right.
2 meetings with
Okay.
her.
Well, and
Well, bear in mind
That's
that
David Kraft was
okay,
elected, so
the
like I
structure
say, you know
is-
how they're gonna vote.
There's 9 board members, 2 are statutory positions. That is, it is always the state budget director and the state housing director. Whoever fills that seat, and they have the right to delegate that off to somebody. Okay. Of the remaining 7, 2 are appointed by the mayor, or 2 are suggested by the mayor, and then the other 5 are appointed by the governor, and everyone on the board is confirmed by the Senate. I mean, in theory, the Senate could say they don't want the budget director, but that can never happen because that's in the bylaws of the corporation. But the other 7, the Senate actually says, appoints. The Senate has the power of appointment in New York State law.
Even though it's appointed by the mayor, even though it's the mayor.
They're not
They're not
appointed,
appointed.
the mayor does not appoint, the mayor suggests the
Suggests.
governor his 2
Recommends.
choices,
No,
and
What's
the
purpose of
governor
this election?
appoints everybody.
Yeah, the election process is kind of a gentleman's agreement, but it's a disagreement where they worked out where the committee can suggest to the governor and the mayor that some people that we would like some people to be on the board. The challenge is, from the bigger picture, if you guys look at it, is that one of the powers of the governor is to appoint the board members of their authorities across the entire state. So by RIRA pushing this issue is setting a huge precedent that infringes upon the governor's sovereignty with his ability, his or her ability to appoint their administration. And the administration includes the directors of the various public benefit corporations across the state. So it's actually an enormous thing that RIRA was able to accomplish, but even getting as far as they have. It sounds crazy, but if you think about, that's one of the powers that the government has. They get to appoint their administration, and they are responsible for their administration. That includes the public authorities. Now, all persons who are in positions of public trust, is the way it's called, have to be confirmed by the Senate, both at the federal level and at the state level.
No, and I should mention that we also have an annual disclosure to fill out.
Yeah.
As public officers.
Let me rephrase my last question.
We got 2 more questions.
Sure, but let me just ask,
Okay.
how would you characterize your relationship with the leaders and employees of RIOC, since you are something other than employees?
Characterize our relationship.
Mentors.
In what way?
And
I
some respects.
personally don't think we give them enough direction. I think we should be way more diligent in what we do, and we've been letting them do what they think is best, and I think, given the they're doing what they think is best, they're doing fine, but I don't believe that we've given them enough direction as a group, because we just haven't gotten together as a group and done that. I think we've got some good people there, and I think we have some not so good people there. We basically don't hire and fire. I know the law says we're supposed to, fact is we don't. In rare instances, that kind of thing can happen, but we haven't really tested it. And the last hiring of the general counsel was living proof of that. Could we have said, no, we don't want to hire him? Yes, we could have, but we didn't.
Well, I did.
You did, yeah, but
Well,
we as a
so
board,
you were overruled, yeah.
we as a board, we weren't overruled, we voted for him.
Yeah.
The majority of the people on the board voted for him.
Vicki, did you have your hand?
I just wanted you guys to remind the people who are thinking about running that even if you're elected by the community, it doesn't mean that you're going to be appointed. So you can't forget that. So it's a lot of work which may or may not work in your favor.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, following on that, even if the governor appoints three products of the election to the 3 seats that are in contention, he can appoint them to any one of the 3 seats. And some seats have longer left on them than others. As it happens, the 3 seats that are up this time include the 2 that we would like to regularize. One ends in December and one ends in May of an off year. So we want to bring those together with the crowd seats. So that, as Matt said, there's a group of 3 whose appointments fall May, June, 2 years off from the others that occur June, July, so that you get the group of 3 and 4. And I totally forgot where I was going with this. So anyway, you're not running for a particular seat, you're running
For the list.
For the list. And in point of fact, after the first election, as Vicki well knows, the governor skipped over 2 of the higher vote gatherers and reached further down the list. Both Aaron Feely-Name and Frank Rentz were not appointed, even though they got higher vote counts than the 2 people who were appointed. So even in the best of circumstances, it's a bit of a crapshoot.
Keep in mind that what we're shooting for is to do these elections once every 2 years, an even number of years, in conjunction with the RIOC elections. Because putting on elections is a lot of work, and what RIOC does not want to do is to be in the business of putting on elections. We want to be able to do all the other issues that are on this island. And if all we're doing is trying to catch up to the RIOC board, we're never going to get to do those things because we're all volunteers. We all have different amounts of time available to us. And if we can put these elections on, along with major elections every 2 years and even number of years, and along with the RIOC elections, it means that we can combine these forces and do them much more efficiently. Now, I would like to ask, oh, Dave, you had your hand up, did you?
Well, I did, but I'm not sure this is a significant question. Not that I could ask a significant question anyway. But I think a candidate would also be interested in knowing to what extent, if any, just as a matter of record, you have noticed over your long times on the board any direct or indirect influence either through the mayor's office or the governor's office, their staff, in terms of how you do business?
What's my question?
Probably less time than anybody else. Sorry?
Nothing here is a matter of record as far as the official board goes, we're here as individuals.
Yeah.
So as your statement is a matter of record, we're not representing the board here, we're representing individuals in the community who have served on the board. Just giving your opinions about the process.
Okay,
So
let's
it's
take
not a
your
matter of record.
opinion outside of a matter of record.
I mean, outside of that, I mean, I have personally never received a call from the governor's office saying about one way or another, or how to handle business on the island, or the mayor's office.
But then on the other hand, we've only received, let's say, let's take the last, the attorney we hired. We only had 1 candidate. So it's an indirect way that you're being, so we are being steered a certain way, and you know that was the biggest argument is that we wanted to see more candidates.
And you only had 1 candidate for president.
You could have said no, and they would have had to come up with
Absolutely.
someone. You decided to say yes.
No, I didn't say no.
Well, why didn't everybody say no? Well, you can't, if you
Of
would have
the-
said no, they would have had another person.
Well, we didn't have enough Roosevelt Island. I felt we didn't have enough Roosevelt Island, that's the same though. You already know that the people from the state will vote a certain way. I mean,
You're,
you would,
They're gonna vote for those candidates.
no,
Yes,
you're
they
welcome
will
to
vote.
review the voting record that's posted.
Well, you must have voted yes if these people got in, so.
We did.
No,
Oh,
not
you
all
didn't.
of us.
They had
Some of
five.
us did, but
Got
not
it,
all of us.
got it,
But,
got it.
but.
But remember, the
Majority
other,
did. But the other thing too, with the original one, we said with the, for Leslie, we absolutely could have voted no for that. I felt no pressure whatsoever on that one. In fact, I felt quite the
I
opposite.
remember.
But I didn't feel that we had enough candidates, and so I did vote no. But the other, I mean, maybe everybody can speak for themselves, but when we did discuss it amongst ourselves, the other board members were convinced that she was a good choice, and that she was the right choice. I didn't feel that we should stop at one.
I remember that.
And the governor's office made representations that they had interviewed a number of candidates, and,
This is the best.
well,
And this is the best. This is the
well,
best. This is
so,
what we feel like.
and so the commissioner made representations about the need for filling the vacancy quickly for various reasons.
Can I actually,
Okay, that's right.
I've witnessed at a board meeting where the commissioner takes a strong stand on something that a lot of you are against, and he keeps pressing and pressing and pressing, and you eventually vote for it. So he does influence you that way, or he can. I've seen it happen, personally. I can tell you what the vote was about. So, that's how they make their influence.
Right. I mean, I understand, I know the one you're talking about. I don't know what caused people to change the vote, but I think your question really was more of a, have we been told by the governor's office or by the mayor's office to vote a certain way?
Yes, any interaction that could
Yes.
be perceived as being influenced.
Certainly the
governors.
commissioner will make a strong case for what he wants. Whether anybody's going to be influenced by that is up to them. I don't feel any pressure when he says that.
There's no
I don't know.
requirement. There's no requirement, and there's more argument than anything else.
Rick, did you ever hear that?
That was my question, actually.
But let me, I just want to finish up on Dave's question here. When I was interviewed with the city, they were adamant that they will never, ever try to convince us to vote one way or the other, that they will never put any pressure on us to do that, and I have never. In fact, it's more me calling them saying, hey, you want to know what's going on over here?
Not before 2068 or so, anyway.
And let me add one thing to that for today's benefit. I think you probably already know this, but members serve until their appointments expire, and they can be removed only for cause. So they're not vulnerable to the annoyance of public officials.
Right.
So.
Why was Janet, what was his cause?
His term is expired. Either your term is expired or you can be removed for cause. But the government can't just say, I don't think I want you on here anymore.
Right.
It has to be for cause. But I think that's a very personal issue. I don't know what people feel as pressure. I don't feel a lot of pressure because I don't care if I stay on the board or not. I'm okay with pressure, and I'll vote whatever way I want to vote, but I can't speak for everybody else.
One of the benefits of an election process is that the community gets to ask just those questions. How did you vote on X, and why did you vote that way? I mean, it's how every election in this country operates. And we're trying to apply those principles here, which is a very new concept. Ellen, you had something.
I know that a lot goes on in between the meetings, and I'm just wondering what goes on between meetings, between committee meetings, between board meetings, so that, people are doing things.
Research.
And how much time does it take?
A lot.
Again, it depends on, some simple ones are, the most complicated ones recently were the Roosevelt Landing deal. That one took a lot of research just to understand, what is the history of the Mitchell program? What is it going to mean? I'm trying to work through what they were discussing. The tramway was a significantly large project with a lot of complicated issues that took a lot of research. There's issues with the parks. A lot of different designs, a lot of community meetings, a lot of issues about, you know, what type of plants are going to go there and how they want to design. And then, like I said, some of those aesthetic issues I kind of punted on because I'm not very good at that. But I discussed, you know, spent a lot of time with the folks reading about the platform that they were wanting to build and the seawall, stabilization. I had a lot of discussions with the ferry people, the Franklin Roosevelt folks about how they were designing the pillars and how they were designing the platform. So I had to figure out that it won't sink or tip or whether they were doing the right things with that. And I did some research online about other similar structures in DC and other places to see, you know, how are they built and how are we going to light the thing and how are we going to draw power down there. And so I talked to them about some of those issues.
And here is where I rely upon Michael's experience when we're at meetings and he brings up certain issues. I listen to him because maybe I might have been thinking one way, but then when I hear his expertise and if he's educating me as well, so my vote may have a lot to do with what he has told me or told everyone.
And there's things like when we were talking about installing security cameras, the price tag sounded kind of expensive, and so we'll get a thing saying, here's a proposal, here are the 3 companies that we vetted, and what do you think about spending $1 million or whatever on security cameras? You have to start research. You have to start looking and saying, do security cameras really deter crime? I don't know. So you look up some studies. We do this stuff on our own. I made arrangements for Howard and I to go down to Stuytown to take a look at the installation they had there, to talk to their public safety people. So it's not just what happens in the meetings and what you see. You have to take the initiative if you're going to vote on this to know when they want to do the church roof. They're going to put in a certain amount for that. It doesn't pass the sniff test. That sounds like a lot of money. I don't know. What are the options? So you have to look up your own options just to make sure that you're getting all the facts. And sometimes you are, sometimes you table things.
We'd actually approved slate roof for the chapel, but after review of some of the material, and we got the details very late on this also, we saw if there were some alternatives that still needed to be considered, and so we sent a memo to the board, to the corporation, to hold off on finalizing on the contract, to review these other alternatives, and it's back down to operations committee meeting.
Okay.
I'm getting the feeling that a lot of what you do is involved with the material of the island. How much attention is paid to the underlying motivation for the creation of the island in terms of what is best to further the vision that established Roosevelt Island in the first place? A lot of things that I'm seeing are changing it to an extension of Manhattan rather than maintaining it as the multi-dimensional community that it was intended to be in the beginning. How much attention is paid to that?
That comes up primarily in the real estate and in the contracts. And we did have, if you go back to the minutes, huge amounts of debate about the provisions for affordable housing and the way that the contracts are constructed for affordable housing for seniors. Because a lot of this stuff is spelled out fairly explicitly in the general development plan and the corporate bylaws and in the lease between the city and the state. And we have some, in the board meetings and others, we've had some huge arguments, to put it bluntly, about the role that plays and how can we enforce that. The struggle has been that the mechanism that the island used early on was the Mitchell-Lama program. And there really isn't within the state right now a replacement for the Mitchell-Lama program. So we're still having discussions about how do we, on the one hand, develop the island so that we need revenue because we were declared pretty much independent from the state from a financial standpoint. And how do we, work with the operators of the buildings to say, like the Westview wants to do their thing. Island House wants to potentially, these people are asking us, well, can we co-opt the buildings? Well, how can we possibly put together a structure so that on the one hand, that the buildings aren't so overpriced You know, if you need to set aside so many apartments for affordable housing, how would you construct a package that will enable buildings to be viable, that will still have apartments set aside for affordability? And these are really complicated things because, you know, there were a number of proposals that were brought forward that we had various meetings on before the big real estate crash. And had some of those things gone through, some of these buildings would have gone bankrupt, like Stuyvesant House gone bankrupt. And some of the other projects in the city that came out of Mitchell-Lama that made really aggressive projections on sale of certain units that have just completely gone bankrupt. So there's a lot of complexity in different topics, like economic models of looking through what are the projections rational, what are the legal bodies, how can we do that, what influence do we have over the construction of other buildings, what's going to happen with the hospitals so that we can maintain some of these affordability components. What influence do we have on that is a challenge. From the buildings, the only real influence the board has is in the construction of the ground leases. Now, beyond that, we don't have a lot of ability to affect how buildings operate internally to themselves unless things are put into the ground leases.
Dave? Actually, your comment touches on one of my concerns that I have, even in raising the question about influence upon the board. If we are fortunate enough, and it's really going to be fortunate in my view, if we get folks selected from our list on the board, given what's coming up, it's not 2068 as I jokingly said. There's a major effort that's going to take place just south of here. And I would suspect that the mayor, as well as the governor, are going to want to have some direct play. The appearance will not be direct, but in practice it will be direct play in what takes place south.
Well, bear in mind,
that's their property. They have total control of it.
Those the two hospitals.
I know.
And are not part of the ground lease. The city completely controls everything down to 10 feet from the wall.
I know. I know. But when we talk of waterfront improvements, when we talk of the building and the spillover to the non-city owned parts of this island and what takes place in decisions that are made, there's going to be tremendous pressure that's going to be put on. So if we're fortunate enough to get new board members on, I think those members, whomever they might be, will have to be prepared to deal with that in ways that we haven't seen before.
Yes. In the case of, as far as the things you have to think about when we were looking at Southland or Octagon, you know, there was a lot of complicated issues there. Did we feel any pressure from the city or the state to vote with it? No, not at all. It probably would have been useful if we had information from them as to what was going on at the city and state level. But there wasn't any, I mean, I had zero interactions with the city and the state about those projects or any other project.
See, the other thing to keep in mind is that RIOC is a small agency, and a lot of times we have to hire expertise. If we were able to rely more on the city or state as helpmates in some of these efforts, they already have on-staff expertise in these areas that would be very useful. They've done these things before. They've solved these issues before in similar circumstances. And so, you know, on the one hand, we're jealous of our prerogatives, but also we could use the help. Wherever it comes from, and when these projects are announced, we have groups through RIRA and through other agencies where people on the island who have knowledge, time, and goodwill are able to come together and offer assistance in these things. It's never turned down. You know, the meetings are open,